Okay, so we've been talking about the whole business of predicting our own futures, and what we've been seeing so far is that it's not enough for us to have good intentions in life. Everyone intends to have a good future, of course they do. And yet it is an observable fact that everyone's good intentions do not work out in 100% of cases. Now, sometimes, and this needs to be said, our best intentions are simply thwarted by bad luck. Sometimes something happens and it wasn't our fault. We couldn't have predicted it. We couldn't possibly have seen it coming. It was a health issue. It was somebody else making a decision issue, and it landed on our lap and it ruined our futures, and there was nothing that we could have done to predict it or change it. That needs to be said. Life is unfair, and each and every one of you has or has yet to have to deal with your fair share of unfairness. But that's not always how it is, right? Sometimes our best intentions to have a really good future are thwarted not because of life's unfairness, but because of our own stupidity. Sometimes, even though we intend to have a very good future, we make decisions that take us in the opposite direction of the very good future that we intend to have. And in each of our lives there is this puzzling discrepancy going on between the future that we intend to have that is very good and the decisions that we make on a day-by-day basis. And we con ourselves into thinking that today is today and that tomorrow is tomorrow, and that they are not connected. That now is now, this is what we say, now is now, then is then, and there is no relationship between the two. But over the last 2 weeks, we've been saying that today and tomorrow, and now and then, are absolutely connected. And that given that that is so, we ought to get into the habit of asking ourselves, if I just keep doing what I'm doing, if I just keep doing what I'm doing right now, where's that going to take me? And over the last few weeks, you've no doubt been asking about, asking yourself at least about your spending habits, or you've been thinking about your social activities, or you've been thinking about your career or your lifestyle, and you've been extrapolating all of that into your future, and you've been saying, okay, if I just keep on doing what I'm doing, where will it end up in 5 years, in 10 years? If I stay on the financial path that I'm on, where's it going to take me? If I carry on ignoring my health the way I have been, where's that ending up? If I keep up that habit that's spoiling me now, where's that going to lead in 5 years' time? And on the face of it, logical as we are capable of being, our response to these questions ought to be simple. This 4-week series ought to be a one-sentence series. We ought to be able to turn to perhaps a passage like this one in the Bible and derive from it the good sense that we need to set our lives on a better course. Take a look at that for beautiful wisdom. The wisest sentences are always the simplest ones. The prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple-minded keep going and they suffer. Right? Done. There endeth the lesson. This wisdom is saying that in order to live right, we need to be thinking through the future consequences of today's behaviour. And if we see, as we are so capable of doing, that a habit today, or a pattern today, or a laziness today is going to cause pain in the future, then we need to make a change in direction and avoid suffering in the future by living differently today. And that's a great piece of wisdom. However, as wisdom for living goes, it is completely incomplete. And I say that, not to be critical of the Bible, of course, but the Bible's a big book. If you read this sentence and you were to think to yourself, okay, this is simple, All I need to do is think about the future consequences of today's behaviour, and if I make those thoughts and then make the necessary course adjustments, I'll set myself up for a good future. So this sentence would be to imply then that if you had a database of the likely outcome of all possible decisions, and if you typed into that database, I'm thinking of doing X activity, and if the database told you that in the 999,000 cases of the people who did the activity that you're thinking of doing, 99.1% of them, the outcome was bad, this would be to imply that armed with that statistical information, you would make a wise decision and go with the big number. That having seen the danger, you would always take the preventative course of action. And I'm sorry to say that life just isn't that simple. If you were a computer, life just might be that simple. Maybe in the future, when they put an AI chip in the decision-making part of your brain, life will be that simple. But currently it is not. Currently you are a complicated, puzzling individual. And when it comes to making good decisions that will set you up for a good future, when it comes to avoiding bad decisions that will help you steer clear of things that will diminish your future, your problem isn't always, and in fact rarely ever is, a lack of information. Your problem, and mine, is that sometimes you just really like doing wrong stuff. Can I have an amen? Amen. I'm shocked. Right, the Bible is... It's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a thing. The Bible just gets it out into the open that there is a side to each of us that's damaged. And for many of you, that's been the hard thing about this subject matter, because you know that in all likelihood, your current misbehaviour is taking you to a future of pain, but your knowing doesn't stop you doing. And the reason that that's puzzling is because we're not bad people. I don't know all of you 100%, but this much I know. You're doing your best. Your best's alright. And it's not always easy. And in the face of it not always being easy, you're still doing your best. You're good people. You stand for good morals. You love your families. You love what's right. And you're genuinely interested in being a better person and in having a future that is unencumbered by shame and guilt. Those are your true intentions, and they are sincerely felt. And yet, in the darker corners of our lives, there is this persistent and menacing reality, the knowledge of which threatens us. So this is your first ever visit to our church. I want you to know that we're really comfortable in talking about how ugly life can sometimes be. You see, the Christianity of the Bible is never presented in a neat, sugar-coated sort of a way. It is always presented honestly, and it gets the nasty stuff out into the open and says, hey, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about life not as we would wish it to be, but as it really is. Have a look at this. So this comes from the Old Testament. This is going to be the theme verse for our next series that we're going to start in 2 weeks' time. It's beautiful. It says of us, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? In other words, it's good to know all the information about what you are like. It's good to have a habit of considering the likely consequences of today's decisions. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is that there is a part of me and a part of you that is broken. And that brokenness causes you and I to find damaging behaviours and patterns and lifestyles so very attractive. No one is immune from this. Look at this. So these words were written by a man called the Apostle Paul. He was the leader, I think, of the early Christian movement. And he said of himself, "I know that nothing good lives in me. That is in my sinful nature." The phrase sinful nature is the New Testament's way of talking about that side to us that just sometimes likes to do wrong stuff. And we know from some of the things he wrote that Paul hated this bit of himself. He hated the fact that although he always knew what the right thing to do was, he always knew it. And so do you, and so do I. We always know what the right behaviour is, what the next right move in life is. And although he knew this, he sometimes found himself drawn towards doing the next wrong thing in life. I love the way he puts it in this sentence. He says, "For although I have the desire to do what is good," and who doesn't? Who doesn't? "I find I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do." No. The things I do not want to do, they're the things I end up doing. Doesn't that just brilliantly articulate your Christian struggle? You intend to have a good future, of course you do. And you know what a good future looks like. And you have a fair idea of what you need to do to get there. And yet, in spite of everything that you know, from time to time, you find yourself wanting to damage yourself and take a wrong turn. A turn that will rob you of the good future that you intend to have. So this morning, I want to briefly look at a part of the Bible that wrestles with this tension. Let's have our first verse up on the screen, please, and we'll get at it. So those of you who are joining us on YouTube, welcome to you. We're looking at the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." Now, it's important to know that according to the history books, these words were written by a man called Solomon. And in the story of the Bible, Solomon was notoriously intelligent. So whenever anyone in the ancient world wrote anything biographical about Solomon, they always made sure to mention his fierce cleverness. For example, have a look at this. This comes from a bit of the Bible called the Book of the Kings, and it's about 500 years before Jesus, and it says that God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. He was wiser than any man. That's a lot of clever in one sentence, right? The writer uses 4 different ways of saying this man was bright in one sentence. So next slide. This is an artist's impression from the 17th century of God giving Solomon his wisdom. So according to legend, Solomon was so smart that you know, it couldn't have come from books. It had to be a God thing. And that's what this artist is trying to convey. God made this man a genius. Next slide. So here's a picture of Solomon as an old man, and he's writing down some of his insights to pass on to his children and his children after them. And we know from history that the Solomon legend was largely true. At least it seems to have been true. And we know that because of the record in ancient Israel, the archaeological record, I'm stammering, so I'll just read what I wrote. So we know that during his lifetime, ancient Israel expanded. No king in Israel's history, before or after Solomon, ruled over such a rich, diverse, expansive Israel as Solomon did. Israel was at its zenith during Solomon's reign. He knew about politics, he knew how to plant vineyards, he knew about architecture. He wrote a book of the Bible called the Song of Songs, which is basically a love manual. Doesn't really work, but he wrote it. He wrote another book of the Bible called the Book of Ecclesiastes, which is an older man's perspective on life. And if you're under 40 and you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you think, wow, that's so dark and cynical. Why is that in the Bible? But if you're over 40 and you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you're like, yeah, he gets it. He understands the way life is. He wrote another book of the Bible, the book we're looking at this morning, called the book of Proverbs, which is crammed full of one-sentence wisdom that was designed to help his children live better lives. And when you read the books of Solomon in the Bible, you get, you don't just read them, you feel them. Whether it's his love manual or his cynical manual or his Proverbs, it's like, what? This guy gets it. This guy gets all of life. He gets industry, he gets architecture, he gets wine, he gets love, he gets hard work, he gets it all. He understands it all. And here's why that's important. If there was ever a person in the ancient world who could make decisions based on his own intuition and his own smarts, it was this man. And yet, curiously, this man does not say to his children, get smart and trust in your smartness. Get wise and trust in your wisdom. Curiously, he says, trust in the Lord and don't lean on your own understanding. So in this sentence, Solomon's speaking to the next generation, and he says, son, if you want to live a wise life, if you want to make good decisions that will take you to a better future, you have to have as your starting point a little bit of faith, a little bit of belief. He says, son, the key to making good decisions is not just a matter of knowing all the information. Believe me, I know all the information. I know about architecture, I know about politics, I know about love, I know about life. I didn't just read all the books, I wrote all the books. But the most important thing that I know about me is that I can't trust me entirely. The wisest thing I know about me is that I am not wise 100% of the time. Believe me, son, there are times in life when going down the wrong road feels so very right, and knowing that it's wrong won't stop you doing it. That is life. And if in those times you lean on your own capacities and your own knots and your own know-how, you will be leaning on a broken crutch and you will fail. So be strong enough to know that you're not strong. Be wise enough to know that you're not wise. And have a little bit of faith as well and trust in God. The Bible says, after all, that God quite likes helping us out of trouble. And I don't know about your life, but he's had a fair bit of practice in mine. Have a look at this. So this was also written by the Apostle Paul, the same man who earlier said he had this huge tension in life between not doing the things he wanted to do and doing the things he didn't want to do. And he struggled with this all the time. And yet in his experience, here's what God does. God is faithful. God is kind. God is loving. God has our best at heart. And given that that is the case, he won't let us be tempted beyond what we can bear. But when we are tempted, he will provide a way out so we can stand up under it. Now, the word tempted in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, means... It doesn't entirely mean tempted in the way that you and I understand it. It means tested. You know what I mean? You go through stuff in life and it tests you. And it's hard. And it's sometimes not a one-time thing. It's sometimes an everyday thing. And it's a struggle, and it's a struggle, and it's a struggle, and it's a struggle. This writer is saying to his friends and to his family, look, here's what God is like. Sure, there are times in life that test you. Sure, there are times in life that tempt you and that threaten you and that loom large over your future. But God is there with you, and he will provide a way out. Just have some eyes to see it. Have a little bit of faith. Don't see the current test as all there is in life. Don't see that as the final page in the story. See beyond that and look for the way out, and you'll find it, because it's there. So when the father says to his son, trust God with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding, he means a little bit of this. He's also referring to the fact that there's a right way to do life and there's a wrong way to do life. And as a young teenager, sometimes the wrong way makes more sense. And so when he says trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding, he's saying to his son, look, doing life God's way is the right way. Do it the right way. Do the next right thing, because God stands behind the next right thing. Look at how he begins this lecture to his son. He says, my son, don't forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. One of my pet hates, actually I have enough pet hates to have a zoo. Anyway, one of my pet hates is overthinking the Christian life. I think in our generation, Christianity has become a lot more complicated and confusing than it was ever intended to be. I said earlier that the Bible is a big book. It actually isn't. It's smaller than Harry Potter. I mean, it's not that big. There's not that much information in it. It's not that complex. But we overthink it. I think that one of the best things we can do in our lives is simply do the next right thing. Just do the next right thing in life. And each and every one of us often knows what the next right thing is, but we resist doing it because in many cases it is difficult. And it is in that context that the older father says to his younger son, listen to me, son, doing the right thing is always the right thing to do, because who stands behind the right things in life? God. God is in the right thing. And you have to trust that. You have to trust that what God says about your relationships is right. You have to trust that what God says about your habits is right. You have to trust what God says about all of life is right. And having trusted that what God says is right, you have to then do what's right. And then he goes on and he says, notice the nuance. He says, in all your ways. In all your ways. See that? I can't see it. My neck will hurt. Still can't see it. These words were originally written, of course, in biblical Hebrew. And last week I taught you that the Hebrew word for way, or road, or path, or direction, and the Hebrew word for behavior are in fact the same word. So we're talking here about your behavior, your way, being a road into your future. And last week we said that once you get on a road, whether it's a good road or a bad road, your intentions become irrelevant, because the road just takes over. The road, not the intention, determines where you end up in life. And that's the recurring theme of these early chapters of Proverbs. The father says to his son, son, the way you choose to behave today will affect the life you live tomorrow. And the promise here is that if in your ways, if in your behaviors, if in your directions, if in the paths you set your feet upon, you acknowledge God, it'll work out. Now we need to pause on the word acknowledge. To acknowledge God at one level is simply to admit that God exists, that God is real. And that acceptance or admittance can, of course, be entirely dispassionate. You know as well as I do that you can believe in God but still be a fundamentally nasty person. Have you ever experienced anyone like that? Very Christian, very horrible. The writer here then is not asking his son to admit that God is real. He is saying literally, in all your ways, in all your behavior, I want you to know God. And for this father, this knowledge is always personal. It's not knowing facts about, it is having some kind of a connection or relationship with. The English language makes this distinction perfectly well. For example, I know Bradley Cooper. I know that Bradley Cooper is an actor. I know that Bradley Cooper had starring roles in Hangover 1, Hangover 2, Hangover 3, none of which I've seen because I'm Christian. Silver Linings Playbook, American Hustle. I know that he once dated Renee Zellweger. I know lots of stuff about Bradley Cooper. I read it on Wikipedia before church, but I do not know Bradley Cooper. The English language makes this distinction quite acceptably. But it is this latter knowledge that the Father wants his Son to have of God, not just in church. It's easy to know God in church. When you're singing a song, when you're feeling the worship, when you're listening to the Bible being explained, when you're with your fellow Christians, feeling it, believing it, it is easy. It is so easy to know God in this place, in this context. But those are not all the ways this sentence refers to. He's saying, son, know God as you socialize. Know God as you spend money. Know God as you hang out in the basement. Know God as you speak to strangers. Know God as you interact with a bum you meet downtown in the street in Toronto. Know God as your neighbour's wife makes a pass at you. In all your ways, know God. Confession time. I know that sometimes I say things that make you wonder about the orthodoxy of my soul, and that's all right. I sometimes do that because I love the Bible too much to blandly and unthinkingly accept the veneers that the church have added to it over the years. And I say that because when we talk about having a relationship with God, we encounter such a veneer. I don't like the term, I think I've told you this before, I don't like the term relationship with God because I think it is misleading. It partly makes me gag. Partly because it's not in the Bible, but mainly because I associate the term relationship with God with some of the well-meaning but nonetheless cheesy religious people who used to approach me on the streets of my hometown and ask me if I had a personal relationship with Jesus. And I don't. Of course I don't. I don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. And so they would say, well, why don't you just say this prayer and Jesus will live in your heart and he'll be your friend and then you'll have a personal relationship with Jesus. And I'm sorry, but all that seems rather flimsy to me and rather loose and inadequate. First of all, to talk about having a significant relationship with anyone is to talk always about an element of risk. If you want to know me, you will have to be willing to take the risks involved in having a relationship with me. And the deeper the relationship, the greater the risks. There's this one line, remember that line in the story of Jesus in the Gospels, where someone walks up to Jesus enthusiastically and says, Jesus, I want to be your follower. I want to follow you. I'm in, I'm signed up, I'm in. And then Jesus says, well, all right, but foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In other words, if you want to follow me, if you want to get deeper, if you want to have a relationship with me, you need to know going in, sometimes it's not pretty. Following me might take you to a place in life where you lose everything. No small print. Jesus is tough. And if you want to be in a relationship with me, that's the risk you take. It'll change the way you see everything. Does the gospel not give you this impression of Jesus? Get into this, it'll change everything. Exactly the same thing might be said of the good futures that we intend to have. To say that you intend to have a certain future is also to say, of necessity, that you intend to show up every day and do what needs to be done and avoid what needs to be avoided in order to get the future that you intend to have. Intention that isn't followed by hard work, sacrifice and discipline is just wishful thinking. Secondly, having a relationship with God is never in the Bible, ever, primarily expressed in subjective things like feelings, or in the prayers that you pray. Christianity in our culture is a feeling. And it's nonsense. This is not biblical. Christianity in the Scriptures is never a subjective feeling. It is primarily expressed not in the feelings you feel, but in the way that you choose to live. When Solomon lectures his son about the importance of knowing God, he's saying to his son, do what's right in life. Remember what Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey my commands. If you love me, you'll do what's right. If you love me, you'll behave. And if you do that, if you choose, notice the promise, to do the next right thing in life, if you choose to know God, if you choose to have a relationship with God by doing what's right, here's the promise. Look at the end of the sentence. He will make your paths straight. I believe that God wants to lead us to a life better lived. He wants to lead us to a future where we don't have to look back with regret and loss. And this writer in the Bible pleads with you as he pleads with me. Trust in God with all your heart. Have a little bit of faith. Lean on it in all the ways of your life, not just in church, but all of it. Know me. Have a relationship with me in the decisions you make, in the right things that you do. Know me in all of that, and I will, the promise says, lead you to a better tomorrow, to a smoother and a straighter path. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't mind a better tomorrow. Anyone in? Yeah, why not? Lots of yeses. Next week I'm going to wrap this up and it's going to be good. Let me say a quick prayer before we go, and thank you for coming. God bless you. Heavenly Father, we find ourselves in this place of faith, knowing you and wanting to know you more. And the knowledge we would seek is not easy. We would seek to do what's right, to make smarter decisions that reflect your truth. We would seek to be good, to be kind, to be forgiving, to be generous, to be merciful, to have faith, to have hope, to have love. We would seek to know you in all these things, just as surely as we would seek to know you in avoiding the things your word tells us to avoid. Be with us in the pursuit of this knowledge. Fill us with your Spirit. Empower us to do what's right until we meet again. We also ask that those people who hurt Megan, that they will be brought to justice soon and swiftly. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.